Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Fabric Espresso series about data engineering and data science. My name is Estera, and today I'm joined by Santosh to discuss high concurrency mode in Microsoft Fabric. Santosh, thank you for joining me for the second time.
I'm super excited again to be back. And yes, we're going to be discussing about high concurrency mode today.
Let's jump to this topic because it sounds like something that will bring me more performance. It's high concurrency. So can you start with explaining the motivation?
Excellent start, actually. And some of the customer asks that motivate us, as you know, to explore this option is in Synapse, Spark sessions take 3 to 5 minutes for session start. And also, customers have always been complaining that I'm just going to use my workload for smaller data, like for data analysis or for running some ad hoc queries. And is there a way or an option to share sessions? And this mainly comes as a huge benefit in peak usage scenarios for larger enterprise customers where they have a defined capacity and they run into throttling, where their jobs compete for each other. So customers have always been calling this out as a pain point, and we have been hearing, and now we have a solution that should work and help them get more faster sessions and also balance out and give them a better compute utilization.
Sounds promising. Next question, the natural question is, what is high concurrency mode?
Awesome. So high concurrency mode is an option where users would be able to enable any Spark session with this session experience, where they would be able to pack and run multiple artifacts. For the initial version, we are enabling this for notebooks. So as a notebook user, users would have an option to go and start the session as high concurrency session. And then once they have the session up and running, they will be able to go and attach their notebooks within the same workspace. And on attaching their run experience or like session start experience, they're going to get the session within like 5 seconds. And this is going to be a huge benefit for custom pools. Say, as we saw in the last episode, users can create custom pools and have even like XX large compute, but it's going to come up with a pain point of having a on-demand cluster acquisition, which is going to take 3 minutes. But with high concurrency mode, the moment they have a session running, the next session, the subsequent session that they would be attaching it to, all these sessions, they could pack multiple notebooks. All these attached notebooks would get a session start experience in like 5 seconds. And this is 36 times faster than the notebooks that they would get in a standard session. Let's double click on how it's going to work in the background. Right? So I mentioned about session sharing, and this is a very interesting concept. We want to make sure that even though we enable session sharing, we want to make sure that we honor the enterprise security fundamentals. So for the first version, we would be enabling session sharing within a user boundary. And in this case, users would be able to multitask, of course. So they could switch between multiple notebooks, run them concurrently, and each of these notebooks and their variables that they are defined inside a specific notebook are isolated, and they are not going to be overwritten by other concurrent notebooks executing in the same application. And every time a notebook gets started and it's running in high concurrency mode, it will be using all the executors that's available in the cluster in a fair-based manner. So there's not going to be a scenario where notebook one could be running extremely compute-intensive queries, and it's not going to like steal all the executors and leave the other notebooks to starve. So it's going to be balanced, so users would not have to run into any starvation scenarios. And the final and the most important point is this would allow customers to get better cost utilization. They would just have to pay for the first session. So since they're reusing the session, they're not going to be billed for the other notebooks that they're running in the high concurrency session. And in larger enterprise scenarios, users would not run into throttling because they would be using the existing course that's already allocated for a session. So they're not going to ask for new course. So their notebook jobs will not be throttled or blocked. And this would be extremely helpful for smaller capacities, users with F2s and F4 capacities compared to like larger enterprise size scale capacity, which are like F5 low, which could allow you to like run more concurrent jobs. But this would come really, really handy for users when they would want to run multiple jobs within a smaller capacity. For the demo, I'm just going to open my workspace where I've created a sample notebook. In this case, we are looking at Contoso, which is a e-commerce company. And say I'm a data scientist and I'm running data ingestion and data transformation workloads. At the end, I want to like predict my customers' buying pattern. Now, I want to make sure that all of this is going to run in a shared mode. So users, to enable high concurrency mode, they would have to navigate into the Run tab. Once they are in the Run menu tab, you see an option for New High Concurrency Session. Once selected, you can see that the session is already starting. And at the bottom of the screen, you can also see the session status. So you can see that it's now in queuing and I'm just going to get started. And once the session starts, I'm going to run all these cells in this notebook. So this notebook is basically going to collect the data from my raw state, raw zone or the bronze zone, and write it into my gold zone in my lakehouse. And I'm going to use it for my model prediction. You can see that it's already running and the session is already started. Now, as the session is started, let me go and kick off my model prediction. So in this case, as we saw in the previous scenario, I navigate into the Run tab. Now that I already have a high concurrency session, I would be able to select that. And you can see that I can see a session that's active from my data ingestion notebook. And it says 1 out of 5 notebooks already attached. So I'm going to also pack this notebook into this. Once I pack it, you can see it's connecting and it'll immediately get attached. And the session is, you can see that it's already ready. So I start running these notebooks again. And as you can see, within 5 seconds, I was able to, you can see that the session got attached in 2 seconds, the notification. So within 5 seconds, I'm able to get my session started and run. And as you can see, these 2 notebooks are now running in parallel. They're literally executing in a concurrent fashion. And as the data is getting loaded into the lakehouse, I would also be able to start my model prediction using the same session. And you can see that my model prediction is already started and my epoch values are getting evaluated.
Santosh, thank you so much. It's showing that it's super easy to enable high concurrency mode for notebooks. And at the end, we will make our costs of Microsoft Fabric lower thanks to this feature.
Yes, totally. And users will also not have to like run into 430 responses where they would have to wait and retry notebooks. If they already have a session running, they could just start it as a high concurrency session, pack multiple notebooks and run them. The matching criteria for these high concurrency mode is, as I mentioned earlier, it needs to be within the same user boundary. That is, you cannot share sessions across users. And you would also have to have the same default lakehouse. And you would also have to have the same compute configuration. When I say compute configuration, it's the machine that you're using. So if I'm using starter pool for my first notebook, my next session is also, my next notebook would also run on the starter pool. If you would need an XX large, then we would need to like restart or recreate a new session. So these are the primary configurations that need to align for these notebooks to coexist with each other.
And like kind of also the limitation, meaning that we cannot share the same session between users.
Yes.
Super.
And users would still be able to configure their properties. But say, for example, if you're adding libraries at the session level, then you would also want to make sure that they are aligning. Like in my example, I had common set of libraries. If there are different library requirements, that could result in a new session start, a new high concurrency session creation.
Are there any best practices, tips, guidelines for users how to work with high concurrency mode?
Yes. So one key aspect is all of the settings that users are configuring. Say if they're going to be defined at today, you could just specify them at the capacity level or at the workspace level. And once these configurations are specified as part of the settings, all the sessions are going to reflect that. So keeping them consistent at the workspace level would make it would actually expand the reuse criteria or the session packing criteria for all the notebooks that are running. And the other one is when I mentioned about default lakehouse, it's just the default lakehouse, but they could also have additional lakehouses added where they could read and write from. It's just a default lakehouse configuration that needs to match. It doesn't restrict that notebook should only write to these lakehouses. They could write to any number of lakehouses that they would want to. But once they have these configurations set, then they're good to go. They could reuse the sessions across multiple notebooks.
Super. It means that on the notebook level, I can attach one lakehouse, but with the usage of PySpark, even currently, I have the access to every lakehouse. Yes. My user is privileged to read and write, meaning that we can reuse the same session to, for example, implement the true medallion architecture. So one node reading the data from bronze, saving to silver, and from silver to gold.
So it is gold. Yeah, totally. You're right. You're spot on. And that's a similar example is what we also saw, if you see in our demo. So it would totally work. And look forward to hearing more feedback from customers on this so that we could enable or extend these features to other possible items in Fabric Spark.
Do you have an idea how you can expand a high concurrency mode?
So one other thing that we're currently focusing on is for different ways in which notebooks are operationalized, like to pipelines, and where users could trigger pipelines and where we could manage them and pack them in a more efficient way using high concurrency mode. And other than that, there are other artifacts, say batch jobs or Spark job definitions. Based on user feedback, we would also love to enable the same sharing experience so users could benefit from that and optimize their compute utilization and also get this instant Spark session start experience.
Yeah, I had a thought that even within a couple of days, I had a customer case when it sounds that it's popular that people are creating a pipeline. Inside the pipeline, there are tons of notebooks which are supposed to be executed sometimes in a sequential way, sometimes in a parallel way. So maybe in the future, based on what you are sharing here, we will have high concurrency mode that will optimize that experience as well.
Exactly, yes. And those scenarios would be much more powerful because that's where most of the recurring job runs or maximum utilization of compute happens in an enterprise workload. So getting it in a more optimal state and packing them more efficiently would definitely benefit customers and also enterprise users who are running into these throttling limits or trying to use portions of trying to be more productive and not be blocked by other workloads.
Sounds good. So the last question would be about some materials. Maybe you can suggest what should be the next step for a person that first time is touching Microsoft Fabric and for the very first time heard about high concurrency mode. What would you recommend?
Wonderful. So to get started, we have an excellent onboarding guide as part of Fabric documents. So if they could visit the Fabric docs link, they would be able to learn more about how to get started, start with the workspace, learn about Spark, learn about data engineering and data science artifacts. And as part of high concurrency, there'll be documents published in the same space, which would also walk them through how they could get started with running a high concurrency mode, what is the matching criteria, and what's the session sharing boundary, and all the other details.
Thank you, Santosh, for joining and sharing all the insights about high concurrency mode. Thank you all for watching this episode. Remember, don't forget to subscribe our channel and leave the comment, leave the question. We are happy to take it. And based on that, also build the ideas for the new episodes. Thank you so much and see you in the next episode.
Thanks
Bye-bye.